This lesson is on a simple Ajax example. This will let me step you through the key elements of what you need to get Ajax to hook up and work properly. There's not much going on here. Let's look at the web page. It's just got a button that says Test Ajax. All right. Click the button. Hello, Steve. How are you? Well, I'm fine, thank you. Let's go look at the code. Let's go take a look at the code in the body, which is very simple. It's a button, not even a submit button. This is the cool thing about Ajax. We're not submitting anything. We're setting up a thread between our web page and the server, and we're going to communicate through this thread. We're not going to submit the whole program. So it's just a button. Test Ajax, on click, we call PHP Ajax is the name of the function. Okay, let's go to the top. Here it is, call PHP Ajax. Before I go into this function, we have to look at this code above it. This code is required. If you want to use Ajax, you've got to do this. When you set up a variable this way, outside of a function in JavaScript, this variable becomes global. It's available to the whole page. Now, in this very simple example, that wasn't really a big deal, but we're going to do it this way in most cases when you need to have this request object global. Now, the way to pronounce this, of course, is XML HTTP request object. I find that kind of a mouthful to say over and over again, especially when I'm teaching, so I just abbreviate it to request object. Easier to say. So we set it up as false to begin with. And this little code here is trying to handle the differences between Microsoft and the rest of the world. If you are Microsoft, you're going to build a new ActiveX object with a special XML HTTP object. And it's going to put that into the request object. Otherwise, if you're not Microsoft, you're going to do a new HTTP request. A new one of those classes will be instantiated into that variable and put into that object. That's object-oriented speak. You know, it's nice to know what's going on, but it works even if you don't know what's going on. If you put this code at the top of every Ajax program you need, and you could change this name if you want, but if you use this basic idea, you're going to be fine. So let's go on now and look at the function itself. This first statement is checking to make sure that the object has been created or instantiated. So if it's there, the request object is there, is one way you can read this, then go ahead and do this other code. Sometimes it's easier to bring the bracket down there to see what's going on. Either way. Now the first thing we're doing here is an open. Remember in JavaScript we have this dot notation? So it's saying do an open function on this object. On this object lives a function. It's associated with that object and we can use it. And we're going to tell it to post. Remember post? On the form tag we have method equals post. Same kind of thing. Now we have another parameter to put here. And this is what would be the action tag on a form tag. It's the same thing. It's the same idea. It's the program that's going to run on the server. So this is a very simple program, simple Ajax example, and I put -Ajax on it just to make it clear to you that this is a program that's going to be run on the server in an Ajax capacity. Normally we don't put the suffix on like that, but this makes it clear, so I'm going to do that for this chapter. So now, let's look at the next line. We set the request header. It's just something you have to do, set the content type, and you do this at the head of everything. And since we're dealing with a form, since we're going to pass data, you do it this way. You can just copy it in. You don't really have to understand it. It just needs to be there. Now, let's take a look at two pieces of code next. There's this code, and then there's this code. This code at the bottom, let me get it over here, sends the data. It sends the data that I'm sending to the program is just data equals Steve. Nothing too exciting there. I just hardwired in Steve. So I'm sending Steve to the program on this object. What's the program on this object? It's the program we set up here in the open thing. It's this program. So I'm going to send that data to that program. So that's the thing that sends the code. This code that comes before the data I send listens for an answer. Now, it may seem kind of counterintuitive to start listening for an answer before you've asked a question, so to speak. But because of timing issues, if we were to send our data first, it's possible that the message would be sent back, the response would be sent back before we could fully set up this message listener code. So we start the thing saying, what did you say? Oh, what's your name? And what did you say? So this code here keeps polling. What did you say? What did you say? What did you say? And what it is that polls is this thing here called an on-ready state change. It's going to detect when something comes back from the request object program that we called down here on the send area. Like I said, we set up this listening before we really ask the question, so we're truly ready to receive it. Now, it does something here we call an anonymous function. That means it's not named. That's okay. The code for the function is down below here. So, since this on-ready state change can detect various codes that come flying back and forth between the server, we really only want to do something when we hear two particular codes. We want the ready state to be equal to 4, here equal 4, and we want the status to be equal 200. When that's true, when it hears those codes, then we're ready to get out of here. We don't have to listen anymore. We've got what we need. Now, where we get what we need is in the request object's response text property. That's where it's going to be stored. So whatever that program up here sends back, it's going to go into the response text attribute. And then I've set this to this variable called return data. I didn't have to do that. I just did it to make it a little clearer. Now, you may already know that Ajax stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And you can receive XML back here as well, and you use the response XML property to receive that. I'm not going to go through that in this class. It's too complicated for just a simple Ajax setup. But if you really want to learn Ajax and learn it well, it would be good to explore how to use XML with it, and also how to use a special property called json, JSON, for JavaScript object notation that can come back in the response text object and be processed with the JavaScript eval statement. It's beyond the scope of this class. I just want to let you know that those things are out there and are being used in the industry, as well as the simple response text that we're going to look at now. So, return data. Now I get the message div just the way we've done in the past. Here's the div pointer, and I set the inner HTML to be whatever was returned from this program. Okay, now what I just sent Steve. Data equals data, and data is Steve. So data equals Steve is what we sent. We got to go look at that program. Here's a very, very simple program that's being called. We have a post, just like we did before, but I want you to note there's no HTML tag. There's no end HTML tags or body. This is PHP that does not run on a web page. Kind of like those common functions that we had before. We didn't actually put out a web page. This gets that data element that I sent, and I'm returning it into a variable called myData. Now all I did here is I printed paragraph hello, and now I do a PHP concatenation. Hello, in this case it's Steve, and with an exclamation, and then how are you? End of paragraph. Notice that we use print, or you can use echo, not return. You might think something's being returned, but that's not the way it's done. We actually print or echo the data that we want back. We can do it in multiple prints if we need to, if it's complicated. I'm in the habit of kind of gathering up everything into a variable and then printing one time. It's a matter of coding style, and you'll see some different styles as we go through the code in this chapter.